A red haze shrouded the distant ruins of a city, blurring the edges of buildings and skyscrapers, making it almost indistinguishable from mountains and hills that clustered around it. Unnatural tones and shades of red overshadowed all colors. Thin clouds, tinted lightly with red, covered the sky and dimmed the early morning sun. The diffused sunlight caused partial shadows, made by jagged hills and mountains that dominate the landscape. But these were not natural landforms. The craggy outcrops were not made up of rocks and soil, but of metal, plastic, rubber, anything that was manufactured and had reached the end of its usefulness and was thus discarded. Garbage, that it was. Piles of it, as tall as buildings and covered everything, even mountains and hills. Some of the older piles were noticeably smaller, having already decomposed and partly covered with red-colored sand. The red on everything came from powdered rust that went everywhere. Blown endlessly by prevailing winds to mix with sand, got suspended in air as haze or borne in the upper atmosphere to form dust clouds, blocking a share of sunlight and lessen the heat on the ground. It made sifting through trash more bearable. The banging of metal was tinny in the thin air. Sound was finding it hard to move through an air with reduced density, and the heaps of garbage trapped sound like it's the last meal. Bob was sorting at the more recent collection of trash. His hooded blue jacket was dirty and well-worn. The tough pants, high-cut safety shoes and elbow-length leather gloves offer protection from sharp and rusty debris. Safety goggles and a face mask covered his face from the stinging, sandy and sometimes toxic wind. These trash must be from the city, he thought. When people still lived in cities anyway, the buildings in those places are no longer safe to live in. It's impossible sometimes to know when the roof or ceiling above you might fall on your head. People now lived in smaller settlements, with houses made from the plentiful scrap around them. He picked and discarded more pieces, throwing them carelessly, making more banging sounds, sure that he would never use those. After a lifetime of sorting trash, you got to know which ones will go to the possibly useful stash and the throwaways. A flat rectangular piece of iron went into his hover cart. He always have a need for those flat pieces to patch things, especially the roof and walls. He checked a phone, still boxed. Nope. He thought as he threw it aside. He picked up a pair of magazines. The magazine on front showed a picture of Earth, with oceans that had receded, and exposing more red land mass. Although decades old, the magazine was still whole owing to the dry air and absence of rainfall. It was published by Geography Now, and on the image of Earth were written, "Can we survive?" At the lower left portion it reads, "Global drought." Bob and most scavengers now knew why it happened. It was the corporations, specifically those in the space sector. They sucked up mostly the water on Earth as fuel for their spaceships. It made possible for them to sustain space exploration and exploitation. The governments at that time sanctioned what's happening. They reasoned space was the only way to go to, with its manillions of asteroids and unoccupied planets. It worked though. The corporations successfully mined the asteroids and set up manufacturing facilities in space. People migrated to space as jobs there became plentiful. But it left Earth with very little. Air, water, and even topsoil, anything that can be used in space, they took it. Whatever they wrote in this magazine was old news, so he tossed it aside. He took more interest on the other one. It was for mechanical works and it featured information on a lot of products, including sand filters. Into the hover cart it went. He continued to dig into the pile. A curved metal disc. Nope. Motorized vice grip? Nope. He pushed aside more household appliances. He uttered in surprise as his goggled eyes spied a robotic hand peeking from the other common items. In his eagerness to see what was attached to it, he just grabbed it and started pulling strongly, grunting with effort, neglecting to remove the other trash to free it more easily. Anyway, whatever it was suddenly got loose and crashed at the base of the pile. Bob was hurled backwards and fell on his back. He immediately stood up and went to the white boxy object. With a hand holding on to each robotic arm, he tried to pull it upright, grunting, but it was heavy. He let go of the arms and gripped the corners instead, then tried again. With head faced towards the sky and muffled sounds from clenched throat and chest, he managed to stand the thing on its wheeled base. Bob noticed some text written on top. Partly hidden by sand, he brushed it with a gloved hand. "Cleanbot," it read. He thought this is an industrial appliance for collecting trash and was popular when garbage began to build up. It was manufactured in space and brought to Earth to help with the disposals. Actually, Earth alone cannot produce all these trash. Most of it came from orbital habitats. It used to be just consumer products that arrived from space. Earth people went crazy with space goods, even when things essential for living are taken up to space. They bought it, used it, then discarded it. It became cheaper to build things in space than recycle on Earth, so corporations did not bother with recycling. When garbage floating in space became a threat to ships or stations moving at many times the speed of sound, they collected those floaters and placed them on Earth for safety reasons. Eventually the world became a depository for things that had been used up, no longer needed or obsolete, and Earth had become one of those unwanted things. Suddenly a clicking tone and the wailing of klaxons warned Bob of sure disaster. He uttered a surprised interjection as he looked behind him and saw the rushing convoluted black wall of dust. Finding the appliance took his awareness of the area. He usually sensed the storms ahead of the warning devices. Because of aging parts, the alarms sometimes gave late warnings. Bob had to decide fast. He can really hear it loudly now, drowning the klaxons. Should I bring this heavy junk that might not work and slow me down? Leave it to be buried under trash and not find out? Scavengers just had to try the things they scavenge. So, even as the rumbling noise made by a million flying objects hitting other objects came nearer, Bob pushed Cleanbot towards the hover cart. A muted grunt and a strenuous shoving nudged the squeaky, wheeled cleaner closer to the cart. He paused briefly to catch a breath, then bent his knees to wrap his arms around it. He proceeded to lift the robot by straightening his knees. The strain elicited more muffled sounds from his masked face. He almost fell backward as the ground beneath him shook when a large piece fell from a tall pile of garbage. Bob managed to prevent his fall and was able to carry his load to the hover cart. He immediately turned it on and skimmed at maximum speed straight for his bunker, crossing through a wide open space that was free of any debris. The roiling black clouds followed, its mottled surface passed over the hills of garbage easily, gaining on the fleeing vehicle. Bob stopped at the front of his bunker. The garage doors did not open automatically as he approached. The optical pickups might not have sensed him. He moved the hover cart slightly forward trying to trigger the sensors, but the door remained closed. There were low tremors in the air now, vibrations that you can't hear but only feel. Vibrations that came from big things being smashed together. Bob glanced behind him and felt tingles up his spine. His behind clenched involuntarily as panic urged him to do something. But all he can manage was wave at the door in frustration, then looked behind him again at the rushing death getting ever closer. The doors suddenly slid apart. he gasped in surprise and hurriedly drove the cart inside the safety of his home. The doors promptly closed as he passed it. Feeling secure, he removed his mask and let the goggles wrap around his brown hair, like a headband. Excited with his loot, Bob hurriedly unloaded CleanBot, grasping it by the handle and scraping its side over the hovercart bin. He squeaked as the bot clanged on the floor. He stood back a while, examining it while waiting for the small aches in his arms to subside. Finally, he thought. Someone to clean up my place. He pressed the obvious blue button on top. He cringed as the corroded contacts of the main switch sparked. The front monitor of CleanBot lighted as it started its boot-up process. Luminous horizontal blue lines appeared randomly on screen, then settled to two rectangular clusters of blue pixels which almost appeared as eyes. The OS ran a diagnostic program. Its batteries still had 70% charge, all servomotors and sensors were operational, everything at the hardware side showed green. There was however a pulsing red error warning on the software analysis that diagnostic cannot define. The OS classified it as non-critical and proceeded with scan mode. Scanning all objects as viewed by the internal camera, the heuristic program identified everything else as usable and labeled Bob as the only trash. Bob meanwhile picked up a metal can on the floor, showed it to CleanBot, then threw it to the trash bin giggling. He gestured at CleanBot to follow what he was doing. He encouraged the bot by indicating more trash on the floor with outstretched palms. Suddenly the rectangular blue clusters of the bot's front display became triangular reds as the OS engaged disposal mode. The wheel motor whirred and the robotic hands held out, ready to grasp the target object and move it to a proper disposal zone. Another surprised sound came from Bob when he realized the bot was going to grab him. He stretched out his hands to keep CleanBot away, but the robotic hands deftly seized him by the waist, hoisted him up, sprinted for the garbage bin, then threw him towards it. Bob howled as he sailed to the open top of the garbage bin. It shook as he landed inside. His tough clothing protected him from sharp corners and edges of metal scraps. Bob groaned as his head spun when he arose from the bin. It tried to follow what his closed eyes were seeing. Stars dancing over his head. He shook his head to drive away the stars. He grumbled, and his eyebrows moved closer together, his face a mixture of annoyance and he is resolved to do something about this humiliating mistake. Bob climbed out of the bin. CleanBot whirred while closing in on him, robotic limbs extended ready to grapple. Having a longer reach, Bob was able to push on the top of the robot, meaning to stop or topple it. The bot only swayed slightly, its tilt sensor and wheel motors responded immediately to restore balance. It moved in again, the faulty program prodding it to conclude its aberrant function. Bob was prepared this time. He concentrated on the blue switch. His fingers aimed for it as the bot came close enough, but a grasping arm made him miss. His fingers just glanced off the side of the button. He tried again quickly while avoiding getting grabbed. He succeeded this time. The flailing robot limbs descended as the motors audibly whined down. Bob placed CleanBot on the work table. He let out a sigh while shaking his head. His face turned devilish as he was opening an access panel. He thought, wait till I'm done with the sweet modifications I'll do to those exposed parts. Hey, maybe I can program it to cook or scrub and paint the rusty parts from my loot. Yeah, but let's start with some simple repairs first. Throwing away someone as nice as I am certainly means it's not seeing right. An eye surgery should do it. Sparks flew as he worked on replacing the bot's camera. As soon as he was finished, he immediately turned CleanBot on and waved a hand in front of it to test the camera. The bot immediately grabbed his hand. He tried to pry open the mechanical fingers, but Cleanbot suddenly pulled him closer and slapped him with his own hand. The bot let go of his hand, but it transferred its hold on his waist and he went flying into the garbage bin again. He looked out from the bin furious, with teeth clenched and nostrils flared. He distracted Cleanbot by throwing a cylindrical object away to the side. The bot chirped as it turned away, scanning the rolling object. Bob hurriedly jumped out of the bin and pressed its off switch. He worked more seriously this time. Opening the top hatch, he replaced filter capacitors and power transistors of the mainboard. Voltage fluctuations in the CPU might be scrambling some programming logic, giving it some seriously wrong ideas on which things were worthless. He is gonna have a personal cleaner in this bunker, and he is gonna make it wear an apron for all his troubles. When he turned on Cleanbot, the blue rectangular pixels seemed to just regard him this time. Its processor appeared to be looping through a decision branch. The program cycled through the results from the visual recognition subroutine, verifying each result. Bob was very anxious as Cleanbot scanned him. Fearing another flight to the garbage bin, he kept his arms close and he leaned back a bit while moving a step backwards. The blue pixels turned angry red as the CPU reached its conclusion. It went after the fleeing Bob, chasing him around the bunker. He was screaming while running, the bot reaching for him, following close. In his eagerness to get away, he headed for the door and gestured by the sensors. It did not open. The ongoing storm stopped it from automatically letting anyone out. He ducked behind the parked hovercart, putting it between himself and the disposal robot. Cleanbot held the hovercart by the sides. Its arm motors whined loudly as more power was fed to it. The heavily loaded cart was thrown aside, its contents spilling and crashing loudly. Bob can only look at the wrecked cart, already assessing repairs, even as Cleanbot grabbed him and tossed him again into the garbage bin. He harumphed through clenched teeth when he peered over the lip. The skin between his eyebrows furrowed as he looked around. His trashy place looked more messy. Cleanbot had snagged and bumped on a lot of things while it chased him a while ago. The cleaning robot ignored the clutter. Instead, it was standing guard by the garbage bin, its clustered blue pixels that serve as eyes regarding calmly, just waiting for him to step out. Bob clenched his fist and head bent down. He was stifling an already muffled scream. His frustration was reflexively closing his throat muscles. Clumps of dried dirt fell on his head. Bob swatted at it and glared at the ceiling for adding more insult to his plight. Up above through the skylight, he saw the dark clouds of dust started to disperse. He grunted and looked angrily at Cleanbot, thinking, "Let's see who's trash now." He picked up a rusty can and aimed it at the blue button. He hit it at the first try. The blue clusters on the front display derezzed and the bot powered down. Bob held Cleanbot by its top handle and dragged it towards the door, meaning to effect his own disposal. He was grunting with effort as the motorized wheels were partially braked. The hovercart was useless. It was at the moment waiting to be repaired. The doors slid open automatically this time when he approached it, sensing no danger outside. Bob did not bother to wear goggles or face mask in his eagerness to get rid of the bot. He was huffing while pulling mightily. Anger made him care less about inhaling the hazardous air. The sun was setting when he was satisfied that he had dragged the robot far enough. He always leave a wide cleared area around the bunker, removing any debris. He doesn't want a mountain of trash falling on the bunker. With a bit more effort, he swung Cleanbot over a small pile of tired old tires. Bob harumphed again as he kicked Cleanbot. He was breathing hard. Blood pulsed around his ears as his heart pumped laboriously, deafening him from the rumbling sound of nearing danger. It took the late warning of the klaxons for awareness to pierce through the pounding in his ears. He ran just as the quaking earth shook the piles of trash, and a piece fell on the inert cleanbot. Bob dashed towards his bunker, feeling the ominous black cloud chasing behind. Lighting flash slapped his unprotected eyes with its fierce brilliance. Black mushrooms shooting from the dark wall raced after him and flung objects along his path. He dodged some of it, but a piece of plastic ventilation hit him on the back and he fell flat on the ground. He groaned and can't seem to get up. He can only raise his hand towards his home. It seemed oh so very close, but his sight of it was starting to fade. He was passing out more due to the hazardous air than from being knocked down. Cleanbot chirped while picking up Bob, its forward display showing angry red triangular eyes. The piece that fell on it managed to turn it on, and Cleanbot was being compelled by its erroneous program to properly dispose of the only trash that it can identify. The bot held Bob high in the air as it weaved through the piles of trash. Omnidirectional ultrasonic sensors allowed it to deftly evade flying objects approaching from behind. Bob came awake as the bot traversed through the cleared area. Although the rubber bellow springs located just above the motor nacelle reduced the jostling, being held at the waist by metal fingers can send a bit of pain even through anyone's hazy consciousness. Bob held on to the metal hands. They are getting closer to the bunker, and he was never more expectant to see the open top of a garbage bin. The bot managed to get ahead of most of the heavier debris. But a surfboard-shaped piece, with the aerodynamic sleekness of a wing, glided past the other deadly projectiles, and seemingly aimed like a spear at the fleeing target. Its thin cross-section, undetected by the bot's sensors, went straight for its midsection, right through the rubber bellows, and cutting Cleanbot in half. Bob went flying in the air towards the door headfirst, his arms flailing wildly, instinctively wanting to hold on to something to stop his ballistic flight. His warhead would surely explode if it would smash into the steel doors. The doors slid apart upon his approach, his speed sending a strong signal to the door sensors to open immediately. Bob went through the open door, rolling as he hit the floor, reducing the impact on his body. He almost passed out, sprawled on the steel floor like a rag doll. The air filtering system immediately went to work as the doors closed, removing the toxins inside the bunker. Inhaling clean air, Bob promptly recovered and he looked out the window. Cleanbot was lying outside, its lower part severed, umbilical wires protruding from the rubber bellow. The heavy boxy body made furrows in the reddish sand. Pieces of it were scattered, already partly buried as the sandy wind blew over it. He felt sorry for the defective robot. Despite its faulty system, it saved his life. His sadness felt like a good companion was leaving, as he realized there will be slow days ahead without the bot. It may not be someone, but it was something that made his day interesting and frustrating nonetheless. Sometime later, Cleanbot booted up. Its internal camera showed a close-up of the eager and smiling face of Bob. He had just turned on the bot and was backing up towards the orange afternoon sun just outside the bunker. He waved both hands at Cleanbot, urging it to scan him. The bot immediately did so, and as sure as the setting sun behind Bob, a fatal error glowed on screen as it detected trash in front of it. But the rectangular blue pixels did not change, and the bot chirped a surprise when the compulsion to dump something was gone. A software diagnostics check revealed several of its program's subroutine was missing or modified, and hardware scan reported new devices were installed. It now has more powerful IGBTs for the bigger wheel motors, larger capacity batteries, and an extra tilt sensor for better balance. A thermal reduction system was added to cool all the extra juice. The stylized heat extraction unit ejects the warmed cooling air at the back, through 4 exhaust pipes sounding very much like a well-tuned gas engine. Sand tires and a bumper that reads XLR8 completed the speedy appearance. Chirping, CleanBot picked up Bob and placed him on the foam chair bolted to its top hatch. Bob held on to the top handle and checked that everything looks good for their first ride. With a big grin he leaned forward to signal the bot of his intended direction. Bob shouted heartily as CleanBot with its upgrades easily sped about the heaped trash. A blue sky, cluttered by a few orange clouds, looked upon them. The end.